John, I think we can begin.
Okay. If you could take your notes for this morning, and it begins with God is Born by D.H. Lawrence. And, it's interesting that his poetry, he died in 1930, but this poem feels extremely contemporary in our understanding of what it means for the birth of God. Every element in the Nativity, we said last night, is part of the drama which represents both our becoming incarnated and also the process of divinization, the process of the whole, the holy and the grounded. So this morning I want to start with this poem. I will read it slowly. And if there's a phrase or a word that strikes you as I read it, at the end of it, we'll take some quiet time and go back to that phrase or word to see what connected with you this morning, okay? So the poem is God is Born. The history of the cosmos is the history of the struggle of becoming. When the dim flux of unformed life struggled, conversed back and forth upon itself, and broke at last into light and dark, came into existence as light, came into existence as cold shadow. Then every atom of the cosmos trembled with delight. Behold, God is born. He is bright light. He is pitch dark and cold. And in the great struggle of intangible chaos, when at a certain point a drop of water began to drip downwards, and a breath of vapor began to wreath up, lo again the shudder of bliss through all the atoms. Oh, God is born. Behold, he is born wet. Look, he hath movement upwards, he spirals. And so in the great eons of accomplishment and debacle, from time to time, the wild crying of every electron, lo, God is born. When sapphires cooled out of molten chaos, see, God is born. He is blue, he is deep blue, he is forever blue. When gold lay shining, threading the cooled off rock, God is born. God is born, bright yellow and ductile, he is born. When the little eggy amoeba emerged out of foam and nowhere, then all the electrons held their breath. Ah, now indeed God is born. He twinkles within. When from a world of mosses and of ferns, and at last the narcissus lifted a tuft of 5-point stars and dangled them in the atmosphere, then every molecule of creation jumped and clapped its hands. God is born. God is born, perfumed and dangling, and with a little cup. Throughout the eons, as the lizard swirls his tail finer than water, as the peacock turns to the sun and could not be more splendid, as the leopard smites the small calf with a spangled paw, a perfect universe trembles. God is born, God is here. And when at last man stood on 2 legs and wondered, then there was a hush of suspense at the core of every electron. Now, behold, very God is born. God himself is born. And so we see God is not until he is born. And also we see that there is no end to the birth of God. So just take a moment and get in touch with a phrase or a word that struck you. if there's anyone on Zoom or in the conference room that would like to echo a phrase or a word that struck them from this poem, please do so. You have to
Hi.
there you go. Yes,
Okay.
Bill.
Yeah. So what struck me was when they talked about what hit me was it was like talking about the creation, and in my mind, I couldn't help but thinking of the theory, what's known as the Big Bang Theory.
Mm-hmm. Exactly. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so that was really kind of a revelation for me because I never really understood the concept of God as never having a beginning,
Mm.
or how the earth was, or not the earth, but the universe was created. And I
Mm-hmm.
believed in the Big Bang Theory. But here, Lawrence talks about that light that they talk about in the Big Bang Theory
Mm-hmm.
is the birth of God and the blackness of the Big Bang Theory and the
That's right.
coldness.
The
So that's
birthing
what
of
that
God.
meant for me.
Yeah, thank you so much.
You're welcome.
Paula?
What caught me was the struggle of becoming. And
Mhm.
then following that was this tremendous energy of becoming. Bright light against the darkness, tumbled with this word, trembled with delight, shuddering of bliss, jumped and clapped hands, this tremendous energy of God pouring out and pouring out and pouring out without an end.
Without an end.
But we're part of it.
That's right. That's right. Exactly. Barbara?
What comes to me is more an image of this very vast dark womb from which everything emerges.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Exactly. From the great emptiness to the great fullness. Mary Ellen?
Good morning. Struggle of becoming also resonated with me, but also further down, great eons of accomplishment and debacle. And I'm just reminded that this is process. This is not one event. This
That's
is
right.
on and on and on. And those old thinking things of if I do this, it will turn out all right. Not necessarily. It will be back and forth in that struggle of enchangeable chaos. Thank you.
That's right. That's right. Thank you so much. Anyone else? Yes, Sue? You're still, you have to unmute. Still can't hear you. Okay. Jeff?
I was going to say what was most evocative for me was that phrase, a hush of suspense at the core of every electron. The significance of the event causes
That's right.
all of creation
That's right.
to stop and hush in suspense. It's just so beautifully evocative.
Isn't it? Yeah,
Of
very
the
evocative.
significance of the event.
And the sense of the holy, right?
Yes.
That every electron recognized that there was a birth going on.
Yes.
Okay. And this is the atmosphere in which I want to do today. Is there anyone in the hall that has something that they would like to say?
Midge?
I do have one.
Come to the microphone.
Okay. Good morning.
Morning.
The one that struck me, because everything we've heard is just shows the power, is he twinkles within. We do see God in the whisper.
Yes, right? So subtle. This is the thing about the poem represents the enormity and the subtlety of God's creation and recreation.
And for me, it was God is not God until he is born.
That's
And
right.
my sense is it's the noticing that gives birth to God.
That's right. It's acknowledging the organic process that makes us aware of what divinity is really doing. This is very Chardinian.
I was noticing the opposites.
Mm-hmm.
God is cold and dark. God is blue. God is yellow. And it reminds me of non-dual thinking
Mm-hmm.
included. And of course, the last two paragraphs there's so much there. And so we see God is not until he is born. And also we see there is no end to the birth of God. And we're
Yes.
responsible for that.
Yes, we share in this co-responsibility now. Once the human has come in and God has really emptied himself into us, that we now participate as co-creators in this majestic dance of creation. And that's what makes us as humans sacred, because we participate in this divine dance. And we can make it a debacle, or we can make it a co-accomplishment. This is the freedom that we have. Anyone else before we begin? Okay, so this poem really represents the atmosphere in which I want to do this morning. That incarnation is not merely an historical event. It is from the very beginning of creation, God emptying himself into that creation and into that process. The truth is that there's an evolving reality, both in ourselves and in God. When we think of incarnation and the virginal yes, the yes of Mary, the yes of Mary echoes this profound archetypal dimension of God initiating, and nature co-creates and initiates back. It's a dialogue. And there's a dialogue between Mary and the angel. The number one thing that we have to remember, that God is always the initiator. It is God who begins all creation, right? And what's important about this is, why is it that we are constantly, like the Virgin, surprised by God's initiative? We are always surprised because we don't realize until that moment of creation that breaks in, is that we are within that evolution, and God needs us to fulfill the destiny. God has made God's self powerless to humans to become co-creators in this creative moment, this reign of God, this transformation. We have, as a nation and as a species, a completely perverted sense of freedom. We think freedom means freedom from. We think freedom means independence of my ego. We think ego is the center of reality, that I'm free to make all these decisions. Our real freedom is the capacity to say yes to an initiative from God. So our human freedom is frighteningly powerful. and yet necessary and beautiful. When it says at the beginning of the poem, the history of the struggle of becoming, what I want to say here is each one of you is a love story of becoming. Each of you is a story not finished. Each of you is an ongoing history of having to say yes, no matter how young or how old we are. In other words, there is no closure to our becoming. When I taught in high school, there were times where I would sit with a 15-year-old and they would argue with me, well, this is who I am. Take me or leave me. You know, this is who I am. That is the great illusion, right? That at any point of our lives, we can say, well, this is who I am, rather than saying, this is who I am still becoming. Because the very last months, days, breaths of our life is still a becoming. It's still either joining in the great cosmos of dying and rising, or we're fighting tooth and nail to remain independent from our becoming. We are made to evolve. We're made to die and rise. We're made to have several births in a lifetime. This idea of saying yes to God in the drama of the Annunciation is not that Mary said yes. Mary said her first and ongoing yes. We never say yes once. Those of you that are married, those of you that are professed in a religious community, when you make a commitment and you say yes to this, is that the first and last yes that you make? Or is that the preliminary yes that gives you the courage for thousands and thousands of yeses yet to come that you do not yet know? And isn't this the mystery of life? I do not know what I'm saying yes to. Wouldn't it be nice if we could? You know, I love, you know, weddings and professions are so beautiful because to a certain extent, it's the innocence of not knowing what their yes means. You know, because I say yes, doesn't mean my ego has any consciousness of what the implications of that are. This strikes me and touches me deeply right now because I have a great niece who got married about 3 years ago. Beautiful wedding outside, you know, typical wedding today, not in a church, but under a trellis someplace with flowers and, you know, the whole thing. And it was beautiful. This past year, she had a baby that had 4 holes in her heart and had to have 5 months of surgeries and recoveries and so forth. That yes under the trellis, they had no idea what was going to be coming. And now the yes of their life together is so much deeper than the trellis. Their love of this baby, they're coming together, they're maturing, they're growing up, that life has challenges, that love has challenges. Okay? We don't know what the yes means, except every day the living out of the echo of that yes. And Mary had to do the same thing. The echo of the yes had to be, you know, and I think one of the great lines from scripture that tells us this is, and she pondered these things in her heart. I think it's mentioned at four different historical periods of time, where it says, and Mary pondered these things in her heart, which really means I don't have a clue of where this is going. I'm pondering, what does this mean? What is this opening up for me? What is the cost of this? So Mary is the symbolic representation of the story of the human and divine dialogue. That there is a dialogue between the human and the divine. And out of that dialogue, out of that ascent, God is born. You know, like the poem, the dialogue between ourselves and God, and our capacity to say yes, over and over and over again, God is born. It's the presence of God in this world. And our human freedom is always being like gold tested in the fire, is always being tested in the fire. The cost of discipleship, right? The cost of disciple. What does it mean to say yes? There are obstacles for our freedom to say yes, and yet that is the chemistry that God allows between himself and our soul to create this birth, this capacity. In the next couple of pages there, this is from the writings of Thomas Merton and his reflections on Advent and this virginal yes, this capacity. The virginal yes, like creation, is total emptiness. It's the symbol of from emptiness comes fullness. Advent is the sacrament of the presence of God in this world. It's the recognition that what happened in the past is happening in the present and is ultimately going to lead us to the future. The three Advents. St. Bernard frequently returned to the idea of three Advents, Bernard of Clairvaux. The first is the one in which he entered into the world having received a human nature in the womb of the Blessed Virgin Mary. Another is the Advent which will bring him into the world at the end of time to judge the living and the dead, the Alpha and the Omega. But the one that we are reflecting on is the Advent in everyday life. This is the Advent in you. We awaken to the fact that every moment of time is a moment of Christ's coming. And are we ready to live out this second Advent? And the second Advent is we participate in God being born. And it doesn't mean, this is not inflationary. This is not about, being special. It's about living your humanity with an openness to the impact of divinity. Mary is the royal way because she played the central mystery of incarnation. I'm not sure if I mentioned this last night, but the soul by nature is a feminine receptacle. Okay, because if God initiates, the soul is the receptacle for divine initiative. It is there that we come to meet. The human soul is feminine in both men and women, because the feminine nature is to be able to receive and to incubate and to gestate and to bring life into the world. And that happens with men and women. We are in a very dangerous position here because Mother Earth and the feminine and the entire realm of the value of the feminine is under great attack at the moment throughout the world and throughout society in which the feminine seems to be dismissed, or misogyny, or all of the weaknesses of the feminine, as if the masculine has overrid the values of the feminine. This celebration of the Nativity is a feminine celebration. It's life-giving. And you know what's so perverted in Scripture is that you have the story of creation in which the woman comes from the man. And in reality, every man has come from a woman. And every rebirth will come from the feminine. You cannot have a rebirthing experience. You cannot have a new consciousness without entering into the feminine container, which allows the chemistry of human embodiment with divine initiative to become a new person. You have to die to that self-sufficiency in isolation. So redemption is based upon a woman's consent. And therefore, ongoing revelation is based upon the feminine consent in the soul. Why do you think John of the Cross, right? His poetry and all of his writings have to do with the feminine capacity to hold the message and the messenger. So often what we have is the masculine, or men in our society, are terrorized by their own feminine side or their capacity to listen and to receive and not initiate, not create out of their own, but receive. It's counterintuitive. He willed that the salvation of the world would depend upon a young girl's consent. That means in each of us, who is that essence, that capacity to say yes? Now, most of the time, my experience of 40 years of being a spiritual director, I have rarely come across a person who has said no to God. Rather, what I have found is that we say, not now. I'm too busy now. I can't let this happen. I've got things on my plate, you know? Or I'm too afraid now. Most of the time, we don't say no to God, we put him on hold. And in that way, we weaken the connection between ourselves and the divine. He is not only born to us, he is born within us. I've noticed many directees over the years, men and women, who have Christmas dreams throughout the year when they're on the verge of saying yes. And I've worked with this one directee who had a very powerful religious experience in which the song, the music was, "Soon it will be Christmas Day." And that was years ago, and he still hasn't exactly had his Christmas Day yet. He's still putting it off. Soon does not mean time. God does not know time, doesn't care about time. So soon may be your last gasp on the planet. But God has never forgotten. This is very interesting. I have worked in retreat ministry for decades. And people will go on retreat, like at Mepkin, pay hundreds of dollars to be there, dedicate time away from family and friends to have that time with God. And when they profoundly experience God on the retreat, they're shocked. Now, why are you there? Don't you trust the fact that if you make yourself open to God and you put aside everything else, that God will show up? Or we will be quiet enough to hear the God that speaks in very timid voice rather than the loud and aggressive voices of our life? He was not only born in Bethlehem, he is born in each of us. And the new life in the new world and the new incarnation that we have in Christ is an invitation for all of us all the time. This is the season for us to remember this primordial yes. What does it mean that when I use the term primordial, that is deeper than I am aware of? It is essentially the breath of God that accompanied your coming to be. You were given, we were made in the image and likeness of God, which means instinctively we share in the life of God and the Trinity of God. There is a yes already spoken within us. Now, this is important. The yes, the primordial yes, is much deeper than my ego. My ego may say no, later, maybe, all the things of hesitation. But there exists within us, preordained by God because we are images of God, with a primordial yes. We are already in harmony with God, except we live in illusions. We live in the see, every religion around the world is trying to break us out of the illusion that we are separate from God. The illusion that the ego has is that I'm it, I'm the center, okay? And I'm disorientated from God. Every religious tradition is trying to break us out of that illusion and to get in touch with the experience that there is a yes that is God's yes that lives within us already. In other words, the yes to God already exists through our own deepest nature. Thomas Merton says this in this primordial yes. He says, in our being, there is a primordial yes that is not our own, which means it's not the ego's yes. It is not at our disposal. It is not accessible to our inspection and understanding. He calls this la pointe vierge, the virginal center. We do not even experience it as real, except in rare and unique circumstances. And we have to admit that for most people, this primordial yes is something they never advert to at all. It is, in fact, absolutely unconscious, forgotten, buried. This is the pearl of great price. This is the seed of the reign of God. Merton says, basically, however, my being is not an affirmation of a limited self, but a yes of being itself. Irrespective of my own choices, where do the I come in? Do I unite this yes with my own freedom, with the yes of being that's already there? Do I have to choose? This is not adjustment. There is nothing to adjust. This is reality. This is free consent. There is the actuality of one yes. In this actuality, no question of adjustment remains, and slowly the ego vanishes. He writes this in the Conjectures of a Guilty Bystander. What does it mean to live consciously with the divine yes? He says, and I agree, this is mostly unconscious and mostly unknown. And the reason is we have been trained to think that the ego is my life and is the only thing that can give me pleasure or unity. My own freedom here is to wake up to the yes that already exists in me. I don't have to learn how to say yes. I have to awaken that the yes has already been spoken. The yes is the yes of God within us that says yes to God. It is the fact that we are part of the Trinity. We exist as a part of the Trinitarian love. What is my own freedom? If you notice that the story of Mary, it starts with, how can this be? It is impossible. There's a growing risk and it remains improbable. There's a growing sense that there might be a potential. And in the dark night of birth, a new light beyond ego now is fated to happen. The dark night vanishes the false self, and finally, I am fully incarnated in the divine yes. That seems to be the mystical process. In that way, we are the mother of God. We give birth to God by our primordial yes. Mary says yes to her reality and her circumstances. What we need to do as human beings is we have to say yes to our fate, F-A-T-E, our history, the time of history in which we were born. We have to say yes to the fact that I had no choice in this. I have to say yes to something I had no choice of. Now, that's very paradoxical, right? Why do I have to say yes to my fate? Because if I don't say yes to my fate, I never live my life. I want to live somebody else's life. Okay? Which means I have to accept who my parents were, my culture, where I was born, how that was lived. I have to accept my fate and then use my capacity for freedom to say yes to that which I cannot say. If I say no to my fate, I just cannot move forward. This is where I have an option to see that my fate is not my destiny. My destiny is to live out of my choices from the fate that was given to me. In that way, I become the mother of God. Because wherever I am, there is a pregnancy, a possibility, a God. You know, that's why the visitation is such a beautiful image, right? In which the potential, John and Jesus come together and there's a leaping in their womb. That is, all is right. Everything is what it should be. This is what's happening. And out of that synchronicity, out of that coming together, we make choices in our life to live out our vocation. And if we are alive, then we look at the needs of the world and ask ourselves, how am I called to address the needs of the world, given my fate and my choices and who I am? Because the yes is never private. When I say yes, it is a much bigger yes. It's interesting that the elements of the human response to the divine initiative is through human poverty. You will never find the birth of Christ where you think you should be looking for it. You will find it in what was neglected, abandoned, rejected, hated. It is the stone rejected by the builders that becomes the cornerstone. So Mary is the model of our archetypal yes, in Mary's way. As a Marist brother, our foundation was based, live in Mary's way. So the elements of the human response to this divine invitation. Mary, though shaken and frightened by the Annunciation, chooses her role by saying, "Let it be done to me according to your word." Mary historically comes from a group of Jewish people that had been called throughout history to be faithful to the law and to God. This group of Anuim were the faithful remnant, and she came from this community that had always remained open to God's initiative, no matter what difficulty there was. Mary chooses to stand in the mystery without demanding answers. She raises questions, but there's no demand for answers. I notice for most of us is we want to take an insurance policy out before I say yes. You know, it's like, okay, I'll do this, but let me protect myself from, well, it might disturb somebody, or, you know, my mother might not like it, or, you know, all the things, you know, even Jesus says, you know, I'll follow you, but, you know, I have to go bury my relative. Jesus says right from the start, what's first is the reign of God. It's not your parents. It's not burying the dead. It's none of those things. Not that these things are bad, but the first and foremost yes has to be to God. And what we have done is we have watered Christianity to such a point that we have lost the cutting edge of the cost of what it means to be a disciple. To be a disciple is to risk everything and not knowing what that risk is going to be about. Mary chooses to continue this annunciation throughout her life in the sorrows and joys of her life. And I think, you know, in our Catholic tradition, we have the mysteries, right? The sorrowful, the glorious, the joyous. You know, one of the things that I have asked people sometimes to create is, can you write out your 5 sorrowful mysteries? Can you write out your 5 glorious mysteries? Can you write out your 5 joyous mysteries or illumination mysteries? Because to follow Christ is to follow Mary's path. To live a full life and to become awakened to Christ living within us will be costly. Now, that doesn't mean that you know, God is punishing you or, you know, testing you or whatever. Living life is costly. I don't care who you are. Life is difficult. Remember, wrote Les Chosen, you know, the first sentence was, life is difficult. I don't care where you live or what your housing is or whatever. Life is tough. Aging is tough. Dying is tough. We had a brother that I lived with for many years who died last night. And, you know, his birthday is Christmas Eve. And the paradox it is, he's going to be buried on his birthday, Christmas Eve. And, you know, life is filled with joys and sorrows. That's what life is about. That is what God is about. God doesn't protect us. And we have had a very strange image of using Mary as an image of perfection, which none of us can achieve, or of purity that we can never be. We've distorted the use of Mary as if she's so far from us. The reality is she lived her life with integrity based upon God's invitation. Each one of us can do this. She chooses to love and to be present without the need to be the center of Jesus's life. I think that's remarkable, you know? And sometimes Jesus doesn't make it easy. You know, your mother and your family is here. Oh, that's nice. Anyone who follows me and loves me is my mother and my cousin and my friend. That, you know, that's tough to take. But what Jesus was saying is the relationship between us and him is that we have made him the center of our lives. Her role is enhanced by her quiet fidelity. There's a song written by I forgot what her name is. It's called Mary. And it describes, you know, the apostles coming in and having dinner and whatever, and they move on to the next place. And Mary is there, you know, doing the dishes, you know, being a part of their lives, but not having to be the central place. She chooses to ponder these things in her heart. Do you notice that sometimes before we fall asleep at night, our minds are still going, and we ponder the day, or we have an examen and we look at the day, and what happened today? Where was God today in my life? How did I say yes? Mary chooses to stand in this paradoxical truth, and in the visitation, she explains this wonderful prayer called the Magnificat, which is prayed every day in the divine office at Vespers, you know. Did you know that in the 1980s, there were 3 countries in which it was illegal to say, chant, or sing the Magnificat? It was illegal in El Salvador, it was illegal in Argentina, and it was illegal in India. At that time, all governments that tried to suppress the people, and the Magnificat is the paradoxical place, right? The rich will become poor, and the poor will become, you know, the paradox of God cannot be erased by a law. And in today's world, you know, we need to say this revolutionary prayer that Mary said in a new radical way. I find it so, and I mentioned this at a workshop that I gave on last Tuesday. I find it so scandalous and sacrilegious that the richest man in the world is making decisions on the poorest people in our society about what is going to be kept and not. To me, that is sacrilege. That's not just that's not politics. That's sacrilege. That is Herod, you know, and the innocents. This is where, and we have to call it what it is. It is the opposite of Mary. It's the opposite of the paradox of God. This is the ego gone wild. This is the ego inflated, narcissistic, and powerful and driven to be in complete control. It's the paradox of the kings coming to adore the child. It's the opposite. And we have to remember that this season is filled with darkness. It is. We need a great light in the midst of this. Mary chooses to live her life in ordinary circumstances, and nobody knows her, and nobody knows what she's about most of her life. She's simply a woman who lives her life with integrity in the circumstances of her life. Mary chooses to live this great archetypal image of the great mother, not only for Jesus, but for all of us. Isn't it interesting that in our piety and in our spirituality, she's not only the mother of Jesus, she's theologically the mother of God, and for us, she is the mother of all of us. And which means we have a universal connection to the Divine Mother. She's co-redemptrix. Without her consent, the incarnation would not have taken place. Therefore, we also have to participate in that life-givingness. Mary chooses to be a healing force of unconditional acceptance and compassionate presence. What we have in the history of Mary in the church is Mary shapeshifts her identity to fit the people she's with. You know, and December 12th, right, the Feast of Our Lady of Guadalupe, the great feast is that she came as an Indian woman pregnant that looked like the people that were there. And when you go to Africa, it is the Black Madonna. Or when you go to Europe, there are Black Madonnas all over the place. The Madonna shapeshifts herself to meet us exactly to whom we are. She's an archetype. She's not just a person. She is the great mother. And Jung, back in 1950, with the assumption, now he was doing this as a psychologist, not a theologian, but he said in 1950, the assumption of Mary's body into heaven was one of the greatest religious events in history, in which the feminine body is incorporated into the heavenly realm. It's the feminine corporality which gives us incarnation. Without the feminine, there is no body. And that's why the feminine so often has been persecuted, because she represents body. She represents the limitations of what it means to be body. And all the projections of witchcraft and all this kind of stuff is always the fear of the body. And we're going to talk about incarnation later on today. Is God, divinity, and body coming together in this mutual coexistence and transformation? And Mary is the object of this. Some of you may know the work of David Rico. He's a Jungian and an author. He's a colleague of mine. We've given workshops together. And he wrote a marvelous book called Mary Within. Mary is a person who archetypally relates directly to the source. In other words, she's always in relationship. Now, I think the stories of the gospel, Mary, I love the story of, there is something deeply feminine about noticing your environment. Men can be so oblivious, okay? They can get lost, men can get lost between their ears so easily. And what you see in Mary and in Cana is that she notices. She notices something's not right, okay? And she intervenes. That is, she's directly related to depend upon the source for her resource and for her trust. Do what he says. Trust. Do what he says. My sister is a model for a lot of this for me. She's going to be 91. She cooked Thanksgiving dinner by herself. She lives alone, still drives, and definitely got all of her wits and knows what she wants and what she doesn't want. But what I have noticed over a lifetime is she doesn't miss a trick. If there's somebody that didn't have something that anybody else had, she will notice immediately. The art of noticing, the art of connecting, the art of relationship is the divine feminine. You notice and you attend to the needs of others. And that's why she is the occasion of grace, because a lot of our prayers to Mary have to do with, like, the memorare, right? Never was it known that anyone who goes to your attention, in other words, she cannot reject you, as a mother cannot reject a child. You know, there's a wonderful image also of Mary, Pope Francis's untie of knots. You know, I have that image in my, you know, we're all knotted up. We're all twisted, you know, we're all, you know, sometimes you'll say to somebody, you know, you seem to be in a twist. What's going on? We get knotted up because we get so self-absorbed that we don't know how to untie the knot. And there's also a wonderful image from the Orthodox in which Mary is on a tightrope, walking a tightrope over hell. And she's bringing one person at a time out of hell. You know, she is the light that's each person is taking one person at a time, walking this tightrope to her, to that image. Mary is full of grace. She is also the one in which we can depend upon. When I was in a nursing home for 2 years because of my accident, whenever one of the brothers would be dying, that our tradition is that the brothers would spend, you know, people would sign up to make sure that he would not be alone during the night. And you would say the rosary out loud so he could hear it, okay, and reassure him. And that the consolation here is, and at the hour of our death. Now, you know, I used to say that prayer and have no idea what it meant until you are sitting there with somebody praying this out loud. And there is a moment at the hour of our death, there's an actual moment, you know? And the great consolation is that at the hour of our death, Mary is with us, her yes and our yes combined. And at the hour of our death, she is the one that is with us at the hour of our birth and at the hour of our death. Our willingness to respond to this wonderful destiny that we're called to become mothers of God, to share in her direct relationship to the divine, to spend a lifetime of noticing what others do not notice. There's a prayer that I'd like to conclude with from St. Bonaventure. And he says, "You hollow us out, God, so that we may carry you and endlessly fill us, only to be emptied again. Make smooth our inward spaces and sturdy that we may hold you with less resistance and bear you with deeper grace. We are all called to be mothers to our God." We are all called to be mothers to our God. So as we did last night, why don't we take 15 minutes of quiet to go back to anything that struck you that you would like to hold on to or like to discuss. And then we'll return at 11:15, okay, for some conversation about what really touched you, okay?
Can you hear us now?
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay, is there any comments, questions, or insights? Yes, Kathy?
Hello. Well, I love the idea of the original yes. And of course, what I've never heard of that. What I've heard of course, is original sin.
Mm.
And I must say, I do feel as removed from this as I do from original sin. I mean, I love the idea that we come into life saying yes, and this is yes, is what
Mhm.
we are. But I wonder if you would speak a little more on this.
What we're going to talk about this afternoon is the human capacity for no, where that comes from, and that even those who say no on an egoic level, there is still the whisper of a yes in the soul. So we'll talk about that this afternoon.
Thank you.
Yes, Paula? You have to unmute.
You're right. Thank you. There were several things that connected with what you were saying, and I don't know if you know this, but my 2 adult children are also a part of this. We just can't all get in the framework, but they're here and we're dialoguing together as family about it. But I want to go back to what you said, and I've been a contemplative for some close to 60 years now, after profound spiritual experience and a lot of support in a lot of other ways. So for me, a way of life and a way of a family life for us has been with, you might say, this sensitivity, trying to grow in the sensitivity of relationships, because I had very good, their parents were good people, but they were not good parents, if you know what I'm saying.
Yeah.
So that for me, I thought if I'm going to parent, then I really want to be present. And I realized, being a hypersensitive person, that you really need to listen to children. And in 2 ways, you need to listen to what they're saying and what they're giving you. So
Yes.
for me, that connecting this idea of the hour of our death with, I've been blessed with an excellent theological background too, is I realize that I'm dying every day if I'm God, if I'm growing in God. And I really connect this, what you said, the sensitivity of listening, being present to others. I'm also a chaplain. That's my service has been in a variety of chaplaincy settings. But that listening, and then allowing not just the listening to be an external thing, but then in contemplative prayer, listening within myself to the
Yes.
movement of energies. And for many years, that's what's been happening, is listening to God through beautiful things like Lectio Divina and other forms of prayer, allowing God to speak and move energies within me. And so, you know, my experience through this has been not really that I get emptied, but I move into rightness of who I am. There's
That's
like
right.
a clarity that comes with this. It's like the energies that are, like you said, knotted or frozen become loosened and eventually move outwardly, leaving me not empty. It's the opposite. I'm filled with a clarity and a balance of energy that's, it's a lot of years, but it's been happening.
Yeah. So it sounds like a lot of the stuff that we're saying is confirming your experience and your process.
That's what our family was saying here together. We're saying, oh, finally, yes.
Yeah, that's what it is. It's confirming a process that sometimes remains unnamed, but
That's
is actually progressing.
That's right. And the beautiful thing is you're speaking to the 3 of us.
Yes, good. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
Jeff?
Hi, Don. The question I have for you relates to what you were saying about noticing. And it made me wonder about the continuum of when it's very clear that we're being invited to say yes,
Yes.
all the way down to times where it's a much more subtle invitation. And I wondered what you might be able to say about that concept. Is there something there about maturity along the spiritual path allows you the grace to be able to be more sensitive to the more subtle invitations, as opposed to, and maybe this is gender-based too, you know, having to be thrown off a horse and be blind for 3 days to say, oh, well, this is significant. I'm being asked to say yes to
Right.
something here.
Yeah, thank you. I think, you know, we have to realize that the yes occurs when we're in consolation and when we are in desolation. That consolation doesn't make me say yes, and desolation then makes me say no. There's a different yes when I'm in consolation, where I feel instinctively wanting to give and say yes. And the other times in my life when I'm in desolation, where I feel alienated and cut off or alone or even betrayed, the yes there is a different kind of yes. It is a yes in blind faith. Because Ignatius says, when you are in that state and you're called to say yes, you have to remember what it was like when you were in consolation. And to realize that you have to create a balance. There are times in which you say yes, where there is no indicator at all on an ego sensate level that this makes any sense whatsoever. Because if it's only based upon feelings, we would be yes, no, yes, no, yes, no. So it's like we have to really learn the discipline that the yes is not only when I feel good about the yes, it's when I feel awful about the yes. And this is Jesus, you know, on Holy Thursday, right? Not my will, thy will be done. But I don't like this at all. This is not where I want to be, you know? So there are yeses throughout our lives, some at maternities, some at deathbed. This is a yes throughout the thing, not dependent upon feelings. Yes, Garrick?
Yeah, I found myself taking off on the last observation of Bonaventure. We are all mothers of God. So there's a way in which God continues to evolve through my yes, that God needs mine to evolve. So for me, that yes is often saying yes to my fate. Or giving in to that yes that's already, that my life has already been made. But then how do I find the courage to continue to say yes to that yes that's already there? And I think that's where kind of Mary can be a model, can be an encouragement. But then I went and said, well, who are the Marys in my own life, you know? And so I thought of nature as a Mary to me, Mother Earth, and thought of my dog Abby used to be kind of a mother to me. But then, at the risk of embarrassing the lady next to me, she's reading this. She says, "I don't think my priest has ever read this." So I said, "Well, maybe you can give it to him to read." She says, "No, maybe I can love it to him." So that's the beautiful of the feminine, I think, times notices, that provides the courage for some of us masculine things to say yes to the yes that's already there.
Yes, that's right. It's very reassuring to me that the yes is part of my nature. It's the deepest part of my nature, and that my fears and all the things that stop me from being cooperative are just obstacles that are not going to win because the yes is more profound. That I can trust that the deepest yes, and one of the questions I ask retreating sometimes is, looking back at your life and events in your life or events of prayer in your life, was there a moment, just a moment maybe, that you consented? That you knew? Now, my experience is that even a fleeting moment of consent, God heard that and took it seriously. And now the consequences are living out of that consent. If you can just think of, I remember one time in my life, and it was sincere, it was real. I said, yes. I know that I could feel the consent. And then as soon as you say the yes, then you get frightened. Like, what the hell did I do? And it's too late, I can't take it back. And I have to live with the consequences of that archetypal yes. It's both beautiful and terrifying. The experience of God is both beautiful and terrifying to the ego. Kathy?
Are you talking about consent to something that we experience as unpleasant?
No, just a general awareness that no matter what, I'm aligning myself with God. Yes, Sue?
I'm wondering about what you think about the relationship between this idea of being the mother of Jesus, the mother of God. What about Mary and Jesus's relationship as they went through life? Because, being a mother birth isn't the only.
No, of course.
Right. And that you brought up the Cana story, one of my all-time favorites on so many levels. Here she's the mother of an adult son. There are probably people here who can relate to that, and this ongoing project of being his mother strikes me in that scene. She says she notices, as you say, that there's a problem at the wedding. She asks him, Jesus, to do something about it, and Jesus sort of puts her off and says, no, this isn't, my time has not yet come. And to me, it seems that she just doesn't argue with him, but she just ignores him when he says that. Tells the steward, do what he says, and then he does what his mother asked him. I don't know if what thoughts
like my other favorite is when Jesus is lost for 3 days as a teenager, and he's teaching and he's talking, and they're upset. Wouldn't you be upset? I'd be furious. Okay. And again, that was one of the times, and she pondered these things in her heart because she didn't fully grasp the meaning of what Jesus's adventure was. And is that not true for every parent? One is not always aware of what the adventure of that child's going to be and what kind of cost it's going to be in relationship to your giving life to this child. And, I think it's a good model of the fact that we don't know what we have given life to. We have given life, and that life is its own entity, both connected and yet separate, with its own will and its own relationship. So this is, I think a reflection on what you're saying, Sue, is that there are multiple relationships with Mary in the inner life of Jesus that we know nothing about. There's the 30 years that we don't know anything about. But what we do know is that there was a deep relationship, but it was not codependent either. She was not codependent on him, and he was not codependent on her. They had, you know, interpersonal relationships, but she had to know his mission was greater than her relationship, human relationship with him. And you know, that's part of the mystery of life. We don't know. Yes, Bill?
Yes. I wrote a lot down. I totally, you used the word paradox, and what else did I have? Counterintuitive.
Yeah.
And I'm putting that out there because I'm using that in reference to the feminine and the masculine that you were talking about, which totally resonated with me. And I totally understand what you were saying, yet the paradox is our world is not like that.
No,
We
no.
do not, what you put out there today and offered us is not really truly practiced. I don't know any country, any society that reveres the woman like we should be, or how men are not in touch with their feminine side. So at the end,
yeah,
and at the end it said we're all mothers of God. So we're asking men to be mothers.
Yes.
And I'm totally into this and totally get it. I was lucky enough to be brought up in a household where I was to respect and revere women. But again, especially today, we're not seeing this in society. And I don't know how we deal with that, or how the church deals with that.
To me, the real question about the feminine side of men, or the feminine, is, at least societal wise, the problem with men is they have very little conscious relationship to interiority. You know, when I've worked with all men's groups, you know, and they're in a circle, and if I dare to say, let's close our eyes and go inside, what you see is terror. Because they really don't know that there is an inside, or if it is, it feels very dangerous. There's a great fear of interiority. You cannot be a mother unless you know that there's an interior. You know, this is the reality. I think men suffer a lack of interiority.
Years ago, I took a course in human sexuality. They kind of hit on this, and based on our physique and how our male sex organs are on the outside, female sex organs are on the inside.
Yeah,
and
that's right.
Experiencing the interior, we do not as men.
That's right. And there's a terror of experiencing the interior, of being lost, of being overwhelmed with the feminine. The issue here is, without interiority, you cannot, by a man or a woman who has no interiority couldn't understand being the mother of God either. Because you've got to have the relationship that what you see is not all of reality. And that there is another spiritual reality that is masculine and feminine and unified in this beauty of creating life. And you know, my major concern is, why are we obsessed with and allowing power to go to men who have no interiority, no respect of the feminine, only money and power, only externals, this is also a statement of where we are as a society and what we value. And therefore, you know, anything that is spiritual of this nature gets rejected. And you know, this goes back to Karl Rahner in 1963 said the future of the church is either you're going to become a mystic or nothing at all. And what's happening is Christianity has lost its interiority. And that's why Mepkin Abbey and these places are so important, to be able to be centers for the interior world, not only the external world.
But
And
do you think the church ever had interiority?
I think it had a more balanced view of the interior life because of its high value placed upon mystics, particularly women mystics. That women may not have had authority in the church, but they had authority because of their religious experience. And we have lost both any sense of religious experience, interiority, the feminine having authority from the interior. And we are in, and isn't it interesting? This is the paradox. The lack of interiority is causing us to destroy our environment.
Mm.
So if we don't have an interior life, we will destroy the exterior life. You know, and this is why my obsession with Christian mysticism, Jung, the interior, because it has something to say to our external world, because this is where we will either renew from this or we will destroy ourselves. And Christianity itself is being compromised by becoming militaristic, by being, you know, Americanized. It's just sad to see that all of this great wisdom of our tradition is being lost. And we have to reclaim it.
We have somebody at the mic here.
Okay.
Hi. To use the idiom, what comes first, the chicken or the egg?
Mm-hmm.
Because I'm hearing trust. I'm hearing yes.
Mm-hmm.
So do you say yes first because you have that trust, or do you trust? Therefore, you say the yes.
And my answer is yes. Because that's the ebb and flow of life. I start with a little trust, and then it's confirmed, which gives me more courage. And then I'm hurt and I withdraw and I learn again. It's the ebb and flow, which trusting in something greater than myself that I know is operative in my life, and I begin to let go. And I let go gradually. And when that happens it gives me the courage to continue. So what you said, Angela, is yes, it works both ways, you know, and all of us have been wounded in trust, and we've had to negotiate wounded trust in order to regain relationship. I mean, even in the life of Jesus, there was betrayal, multiple layers of betrayal in anyone's life. So who do you trust? So, you know, I mean, this is a very complex dialogue between our choices and our trust, and going deeper and deeper, you know, and that's why it's so slow. That's why it's a lifetime's work. Mary Ellen?
I think of grace as such a big part of this, and I get very
Absolutely.
circular with that, because if I think I'm saying yes, isn't that just a product of the grace I've been given?
Yes, that's right.
Yeah.
Yeah, and the thing is, here's the thing about how God works. I can't say yes without the grace. Yet at the same time, I can't fulfill my destiny until I say yes. Because when I say yes, it gives permission for my feet to go and to do the things I need to do. Because the yes is not a theoretical interior thing. The yes is setting your feet on a task, on a journey. You know, if I say I trust and I don't move, then did I trust? And I love the gospel story where Jesus again says the story of the two sons, you know, I need you to go out to work. The first guy says, sure, but never goes. And the second one says, oh no, I want to be with my friends, blah, 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 but he goes. And Jesus asked the question, basically, in relationship, who did the will of the Father? The one who enthusiastically said yes and did nothing? Or the one who battles with his ego and says, I don't want to do it, but I do want to do it because it is in relationship to the person who asked me to do it? So it's, you know, I think what we keep forgetting is the act of obedience is with the feet, not the head. Did I do the will of the Father? Or did I, in a moment of weakness, say yes, and then not do anything? You know, I mean, I've worked in religious formation for, you know, an eternity, and people say, yes, I want to become a monk, or yes, I want to do this. Well, that's nice in theory, but okay, now you got to show up. What's the yes like? What's the, you know, in theory, obedience to listen to God, blah, blah, blah. But then when you have to become obedient, it's a whole different ballgame. The action is in the feet, not in the head. Now, this afternoon, we're going to deal with Joseph and his dreams. And we're also going to look at the difference between Herod and Joseph. And that will give us an orientation as to whom do I model my life on? The Herods in the world or the Josephs in the world? So that's going to be our looking at this afternoon, okay? And then tonight, we'll look at incarnation, okay, the Jesus being born, but also what does it mean to live in a body and what does it mean to be an animal in our relationships to animals? I love the fact that in the crèche are animals. The warmth of the cave is from the animals. The smell is of the dung of the animals. You know, this is the great descent in the ascent. So we're going to look at that this evening, which will then give you, you know, the rest of your time to reflect on all of this material. Okay, so this afternoon, we're going to look at Joseph and his dreams and how do we see the difference between the evolution of Joseph and the evolution of Herod. Okay.
We assemble at 2.
See you at 2.